Is there anything like new to say?
I guess we can summarize it real quick. FTX was a very large exchange. They were marketing to people in the US, but they are domiciled in one of the jurisdictions that people put companies when they're doing things that are illegal. Probably doing things that were illegal with investments. Clients were depositing money to trade. Then they took that money and spent it on apparently kind of disappeared into thin air. This is the definition of a Ponzi scheme, when you take people's investments and then help other people pay out their money. It looks like that's what they were doing. Obviously, there's nothing good to say about this, and it completely destroys the reputation of anybody near this. So is this the read? Complete fraud, waste of time, don't trust people under 30 to run finance companies? Or don't invest money in offshore entities, avoiding regulation?
I would imagine a lot of people could start lumping FTX in as a group with all the other crypto exchanges. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. I think it's interesting to think about how does it and how should these revelations affect an organization like Coinbase, which is probably in a much less risky situation, but it's still a centralized exchange run by relatively young people with visionary ideas about what crypto can do for the world.
They're a public company, a U.S. exchange domiciled in California. Those are trust signals. Mm-hmm. You got to look at that differently.
Which I guess is just in the near term not great for the healthy development of the industry. Oh, Nolan Glitch brought up KuCoin.
I believe they had made some tweets. So there's a rush to transparency.
Well, rush to transparency theater.
Transparency theater. That is the quote. Oh, yeah. This is, I remember this. The strategy of KuCoin is to release a Merkle tree proof of reserves. Whatever it is, it's going to be better than it was. I have no reason to doubt KuCoin. If people want to trade, would you really think to work with FTX? You're really going to do that offshore? Really? What does FTX have that Coinbase doesn't have?
Well, they had less regulatory scrutiny. And I guess they had, I'm guessing, some pretty attractive staking loaning products. They could get higher rates because they were higher risk.
But there's probably some people who joined FTX thinking they were investors, thinking that this was a not speculative, buying Bitcoin and planning to have the Bitcoin still there when they want to get it out.
Because if you think about a lot of the people that bought their first crypto in 2021, just because, they thought it was interesting. Back then, there were all kinds of ads for Coinbase and FTX and Crypto.com, and they were all right next to each other. Crypto.com and FTX for buying stadiums. Maybe even myself, like on a whim, I could have just bought the Bitcoin and Ethereum that I expected to hold on that exchange instead of Coinbase. And there were probably a lot of people that it's like a random sampling, general population that got their first accounts. It's all randomly split across a lot of the big exchanges. And it's just the FTX people are getting burned, even though, it's just because they didn't do as deep of research as people like us that listen to calls like this.
That's a good point. Basically, Coinbase had a Super Bowl ad. FTX had a Super Bowl ad. The Coinbase ad, they literally said nothing. They literally couldn't find any good thing to say anything about anything. They just put a QR code on the screen. Why? Because they knew lawsuits were coming, and they knew that anything they put in that Super Bowl ad is going to be used against them. So they didn't put anything in Super Bowl ad. They put nothing in.
Right. That's a level of 3D chess that I think is easy to miss. One other interesting element is the Binance stuff.
CZ says, to reduce further cascading negative effects, Binance is forming an industry recovery fund to help projects who have a liquidity crisis. And then here's my negative response. The obvious play, when AIG was falling apart, who would love to have AIG's asset book? So right before AIG implodes, staring at that asset book, short sell everything on that with leverage, because they're going to have to unwind all those positions. Asking to see those balance sheets, it's like, give me free alpha. Otherwise, you'd really need to trust CZ. I don't know CZ's reputation, but there's a lot of trust in being distressed and showing your asset list to somebody. Yes, the person you're sending to is an active trader. And where do you think alpha comes from?
I don't know if there should be any ethical barriers because the people that are in a tough spot I don't know how much sympathy I'd have for them. They're in a tough spot because they don't have enough reserves in their fly-by-night centralized crypto exchange.
So we don't have to have sympathy for the people that are mismanaging a finance company. For CZ to say this is that predatory, or, but I don't know how to, or some people might think that CZ is being very helpful. But anyway, I'm just trolling. I don't know his intentions, and CZ could come back with a Chinese firewall in China to do this, but we'll see.
I've seen some people that have DEXs posting like, oh, we can't trust centralized exchanges, so come use our DEX. I think to some extent, the way that some of them are set up, is totally transparent about what's actually in all their pools. It's an interesting proposition. No government can find somebody to blame if they don't like what the DEX is doing, or it's harder to attribute blame, or if people are actually truly synonymous.
For the DEX, I mean, there's two types of DEX. There's DEX and there's not DEX. Sometimes they say there's DEX, and really it's just unknown. Like you put money in, and then you're trading and you're getting money out, but your counterparty is just some anonymous robot.
Right.
For example, this includes Shapeshift. Shapeshift is not a DEX, and when the feds came, they started asking for KYC. So not a DEX, but some people might have thought it was decentralized because you don't have to make an account. Some people think no KYC equals DEX, which is not the case. An actual DEX is your counterparty is just either the trade, or if you're taking a loan, it's the liquidator. So those are the only participants. Nobody has signing authority over your assets, unless there's a price oracle, which a lot of people forgot about. Compound Finance version 1, at least, had a price oracle, and I was planning to make a OpenSea backdoor type of Twitter post about Compound, but I think they fixed that in version 2, so no sense talking about the past. If somebody else is based on the old Compound Finance protocol, I have a good blog post coming up.
So what does that say about KuCoin?
Well, that one's centralized, right? So they can enforce margins faster. It's different. It's a mix of how much is your reputation, how much is the value of the product as a going concern, what is your risk of going to jail. All these things come together.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Pleasure to meet both of you. First time tuning in. I'm not sure if it's within the context of this space, but Will, I'd love to obviously learn more about, what the whole process was like finding that kind of OpenSea backdoor. Unfortunately, I'm yet to read the full write-up that I think you posted on one of your blogs. But yeah, I'd love to definitely know more about, what made you want to kind of look into that contract, how you got a hunch that something was, a bit off there. And just go off that.
That was the segue, thanks.
No problem.
So here's the kickoff. So this is October 3rd. Messing around, looking at stuff. I think this had to do with Rawlings because Rawlings was using the OpenSea shared storefront. We were debugging it, like where's the NFT? Where is it? When you mess around with blockchain, one of the things you do on Ethereum is you pull up Etherscan and you just start clicking on whatever it is. You want to see if it showed up. You want to see, did my transaction hit? Does the NFT exist? Who owns it? You want to see the transfers. Just pretty normal stuff. Here's the contract. Pulled it up and I found the transaction. I found what you can't see is the contract. So I clicked on contract and I'm like, bro, you didn't verify your contract on Etherscan? This is something everybody does. What I normally do is I troll. And so I went on Twitter and I trolled them and I'm like, there's 1 million NFTs sold here. Take the time to publish your contract. Don't make me have to find an exploit. And that's the ominous tweet. That's the before tweet. 12 likes, 1 quote retweet. That just sat with me. I got a couple of these. When things tick you like this, you go and you hack them, right? So one day we'll have a class about this, but literally you just print out the assembly from the smart contract and you just disassemble it and you read it. And this is, really fun. Here I'm on page 32 of just, none of it makes sense to me. It's like reading a novel, but you're only looking at the letters, not the words.
So were you parsing it and like, oh, like this is an approve all function?
So, I mean, you can see the name of the external function, like this is approve or this is mint. You're reading how they work. And so the way it works is just var0 equals, var1 equals, var2 equals, var17 equals. You're using pens and marker, and you're like, hey, var17 is whether or not they're the owner. var16, here's this. You're tracking it like that. You're reading it over and over, and you're like, wait a minute. This if condition is checking whether the owner is doing this or if something else is doing it. But this is a transfer function. I really think it should just be the owner or the approved. And you're like 5 layers, because every one of these is a different page. You're jumping around. So the pages are numbered and you're like, oh, wait a minute. This looks like a problem. I actually thought I found a slightly different problem. I was talking to Dan about it. Like I thought the owner could transfer it, but you're just staring at code. Like you have no idea what the code means. So I want to test it. Like you don't write a blog post about what I think the code means. You have to prove it. What I started doing is I started writing this exploit. Now the exploit, I can't run the exploit. It's not an exploit. It would only be runnable by OpenSea. So version 1, I made the exploit and it didn't work. And I was reading it. I'm like, well, why didn't it work? Now that I got into this and I was debugging an actual transaction, it was actually very helpful to see how that works. And there's a super useful tool that I gave them a shout out at the bottom.
Was this for the mainnet fork?
Yep, mainnet fork. You can see the stores and the loads and the fork. I found that my original idea was it was a nothing burger. So I'm glad I didn't tweet that and it wasted everybody's time. So then as I was tracing it, I was thinking, I know there was something bad in the code, but apparently I didn't know exactly what it was. So then now that I've got 2 microscopes looking at it from both sides in 3D, now it's like, okay, I found it. It's not the owner of the contract. It's like a proxy owner. I use the proxy owner to inject these proxies, and the proxies had control to steal this thing. So at the end of the day, it proves that the owner can steal the things. It's a 2-step process, inject and steal, but at the end of the day, it is something the owner can do. OpenSea can take your NFTs, which is a true statement.
Yeah, wow, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. I guess a kind of follow-up question that I have in regards to that is, so obviously, you took this smart contract that essentially wasn't verified. What kind of tooling would you recommend for somebody who wants to learn?
Yeah, I got it for you right here. I'll show you the first 3 minutes of what I did. Maybe this will turn into a blog post in the future. So what you do is you go to Etherscan, you get the address, you come into this online Solidity decompiler. This is one of them. There's other ones. This one's fine. You click decompile. We skip over this stuff and we just go straight into this source code here. You take all this code, copy, you have a Microsoft Word, change your margins to small, and then you paste it in there.
Critical step.
Otherwise, that changes it from like 80 pages to like 40. And you cannot look at this on a screen. Oh my God, you got to print this out. You can't cross-reference 80 pages of code in VS Code. It's just brain destruction. And then you literally go to your kid's desk and steal highlighters. And you start highlighting these different things. You're getting into pages and pages of this stuff. The most important thing, like, you're here, you're in the mint function, and then you're on like function 1b57, and then that calls function 2558, and that calls function 3415, and then 3415 has a return statement. Great. You got to make a note about this. What is it actually returning? Then you have to go back, put a note here, go back, and then put the note here. Then you get to a point when you're using color markers, you're like, after like 50, 60 pages, you're like, screw it. Like, I want to find anything. Like, I don't care what it is. Like, I don't need to understand everything. I just got to like finish my job, man. So then you start color coding, like, this looks bad, red. This looks fine, green. And you're like, okay, I'm going to focus my attention on this red thing. And because you can't, there's a lot of back and forth. And then eventually the red thing gets you to somewhere. Then you got to use your brain and be like, okay, this is probably not how they're advertising this thing to work. Like, minting should not be allowed to replace something that was already minted. That's not something I checked for, but if you found that, you'd be like, okay, that's probably a problem.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. Definitely keen to look into these. And thanks for answering my question so deeply as well. I appreciate that too.
Cool. Thanks for following. I'll give you the easiest one right now is nft.life.
Perfect. Thanks. I'll start off with that. Definitely keen to whip out the red highlighters and see how I go.